Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. I apologise, we're having a late start. If you're watching live tonight, we're running about 10 minutes late. I'm sorry I was unavoidably detained earlier. It is another Tuesday afternoon. If you're watching live at 6 p.m. or a little after 6, the call-in number is 640-3091. That's area code 603-640-3091. So we're waiting here right now to see what will happen with regard to the budget in Manchester, and it's unclear what will happen. It was disappointing last week while this programme was on, which was my excuse for not being there, was the public comment on the budget. So every year by charter, the city is required or the Board of Mayor and Aldermen are required to announce and give adequate notice of a public meeting, and to allow the public the opportunity to comment on the proposed city budget. And last Tuesday, as I understand it, 3 people spoke. There were 4 people there. I was told 3 people spoke regarding the budget, and I guess it means that most people are either satisfied with the budget that's there. It's one thing one can take from that, or they are disengaged from the process. Frankly, I think that the lack of excitement and vigour around the budget process in Manchester has more to do with the effect of the tax cap than anything else, because it's a lot easier to get people to coalesce around the idea of building something than it is to have people go in and fight to have the edifice torn down a little more slowly than would otherwise happen. And I don't know, I'm trying to read tea leaves. I'm disappointed that so few people involve themselves in local politics. I don't have any illusions either, right? I mean, it's not everybody's cup of tea, and people are busy trying to get on with their lives and put food on the table and work and play and look after their kids and manage all their other interests. And I think it's entirely natural and normal that many people just even those who vote, that they elect their public representatives, in this case every 2 years, and they trust them to get on with the job. And until such time as something sort of hits them directly, they will choose to perhaps contact their local representative. I think that sadly there's a large number of people, close to a majority, but certainly a large number of people who neither vote nor contact their local representative, probably don't know who their local representative is, and so sort of acquiesce to the situation. I guess there are people who have either given up or just don't understand that their voices really do matter. I think what is sad is that the few who are ideologically strident, that they're very committed to certain outcomes, etc., they're sort of activists, and they sort of become very active, and then so their voice is given inordinate weight, and that seems to be the nature of things. I'm reminded that I used to talk to a resource officer, the police officers in our schools once, who used to come to PTO meetings every month. And the resource officer was always apologetic to me, saying, I'm sorry, but there's not a lot that I have to talk about this month, and so because on our monthly report there was a place for the resource officer to say a few words, and they found themselves every month just saying the same thing. And my point to them was, there will be a day come sometime when, God forbid, but there will be an incident happen, And we will have, there'll be 150 or 200 people here who will have questions for you, and so don't be apologetic. It's a wonderful thing, I guess, that there are not that many people here. And so when it comes to the city budget, I guess that the fact that there are not that many people there is because people are acquiescent to or are in agreement with the way things are going on, and which brings me to the idea of leadership. So most people I believe in a rational world, that there's no, I don't believe in these Machiavellian ideas about people in power pulling levers and manipulating populations and all that stuff. It's not as though marketing, etc., doesn't have an effect, but in the end, I think people behave rationally, and in this case, I bring it back to our political leadership, and that word leadership should be underlined and it should be capitalized, because part of what our public representatives should be doing is leading, and I believe that they are not doing so with regard to our schools, because it's difficult. And as I said to them when I went before the Board of Mayor and Aldermen a few weeks back, I made the point that first of all, I thank them for what they do, because oftentimes people might see me as railing against our public representatives, and I'm always in that quandary too, right? These are people who have chosen to put their foot forward and to work largely for free, except for the healthcare issue, which is an annoyance, at least at very least an annoyance, and something more perhaps. But these people do give up of their time and are. While others are sitting at home watching TV, these people are out trying to make a difference in their community. And so, I do want to always recognize that fact, because it's free. Anybody can step up and run and have their voice heard and have their ideas tested. So when I do challenge and say things like, I don't believe they're leading, I'm not. It's not born of thinking that they're terrible people and they're bad and etc. It's not that at all. It's just that, again, it's back to, I believe people act rationally, and the rational position of a politician in Manchester today, given that we have a tax cap, is that the tax cap is a very blunt instrument, and it has a deleterious effect on the city generally, and so but people choose to not buck against it because it's sort of a political third rail. I think that the answer to that is to explain to people, who don't know any better because they haven't been told, explain to people where the deficiencies are and what is needed. The tax cap, in and of itself, is a very simple idea, and if you had a history of profligate spending, wild spending beyond inflation, and if that was going on in the city and there was great waste, then implementing a tax cap to bring some, let's call it, rationality to things would make sense. I hear people, and we'll have people call up this program pretty regularly and say things like, whatever way they will couch it, but they'll talk about, well, we've had declining student populations over time, which is true in the case of, in very least in the case of the surrounding towns departing, and that our budget goes up, and we spend more and more and more money every year, and of course that part is not true. I mean, it's not true in the sense that in real terms we're not increasing the amount of money spent. We're finding it difficult to keep in line with inflation, and without getting into the woods too much or down into the weeds too much, there's a case that has been made that the CPI, Consumer Price Index, that we use to measure the costs. So the idea would be that whatever the background raise in cost is for any given year, that the expenditures be limited to that. So the presumption, even though I don't like the tax cap to start with, but if the tax cap was to work properly, the idea is, look, if inflation's at 3%, and so the cost of paper and pencils and school buildings and buses has gone up by whatever that number is, because the tax cap doesn't, if CPI was at 10%, then the tax cap would be at 10% as well. The tax cap is down at 1.5% because CPI is at 1.5%, or whichever number it is today, 1.6 or 1.7, whatever it may be. So the idea behind it is that the school system, and just to deal with the school system side, that the school system would have the amount of money it needs to maintain the programs that it has in place, and that any additional programs that it might want to add, it would have to find savings in some other area of expenditure in order to add a program. The problem with that is that you have taken a snapshot in time and you've said this set of programs and this level of activity, we're going to bake those all. We're going to put those all in the recipe, and that's how it's going to be. So the pupil-teacher ratio, the energy efficiency of buildings, the number of books and how often they ought to be replaced, the facilities available in libraries, the amount of trips that kids should be allowed to take, the number of instruments that there should be in the band, all of it across this very large, expansive, complicated enterprise, that all of it should be set in stone from a moment in time of roughly 10 years ago. Well, that's not the worst, and I don't like that, but it's not the worst idea in the world, except for a couple of things. One is that the place that we drew the line some years ago, when the tax cap was brought in, was after we were already in pretty rough shape on the school side. We hadn't invested in our schools in a long time. If we had had a building renovation renewal program in place that was built into the tax cap, so that there was an allowed number that every year that a certain percentage could be used for rehabilitating buildings, and when you own 30 buildings, you renovate one a year, you do it over 30 years. You renovate two a year, you do it over 15 years. But needs change, etc. But that wasn't there, so you have that problem, and then you have the problem that you've set in stone everything that was there at that time. Now, just to be ridiculous for a second, to illustrate my point, if you were to take Manchester City expenditures in any given year, back over the longer term, and if you were to take 1950 as a place, or 1900 as a place to start, or whichever year you want. If you would put a tax cap in place, just to be ridiculous for a minute so I can make my point, if you were to put a tax cap in place in 1900 in Manchester and say, starting in 1900, we got a tax cap in place, and we will not increase spending in the city of Manchester over and above the price of inflation for time immemorial forward from now. This tax cap's in place. It's written into the city charter, and it will not be changed. So you would have a city with mud streets because it wasn't prepared for cars. You would have no traffic lights. You would have very narrow streets. You'd have a very small police force. Without cars, they'd be walking the beat somewhere. You'd have so you can picture it yourself, right? Obviously it wouldn't work. The fact is, for a city like Manchester, it either grows or it dies. It's either growing or it's dying. It's either improving itself annually, regularly, and that means annually, or it's deteriorating, and remaining stagnant and not doing anything is actually deteriorating. That's the effect of the tax cap in the long term. So by drawing a line on education 10 years ago or whatever it was, that's the position we have ourselves in. And so that's why I oppose the tax cap. It holds us in a place and doesn't allow for innovation, etc., or at least stifles it. It doesn't. Innovation can happen, but it's stifled. You certainly can't add anything. You've decided this is the place that you're going to hold the line on. And I just don't agree with it because it makes no sense. And that I like the fact there are traffic lights on the corner of Bridge and Elm Street and on the corner of Granite and Bridge Street, because I think it's good that we can actually drive cars around the city. And so I'm delighted we decided to pay for that. And that would have burst the tax cap had there been one. To be more practical today, not all cities use the CPI number we use, and the difficulty with the CPI. And I'm sorry if we're getting into the weeds, but this is sort of the reality of where we are in Manchester. We've gotten to being the least well-funded school system in the state because of our policies. And because of the refusal of our leadership to actually stand up and explain to people, like I'm attempting to do here, that there are systematic, as Dr. Vargas calls them, structural dysfunctionality. He uses a different word, structural flaws, structural elements to our budget that need to change. And I applaud him for that because he's just calling it out. He's not saying we need to break tax caps, we need to do anything. He's just saying, we have a ship, it's taking in more water than the pumps are pumping out. It'll last for a long time, but eventually it will sink until we stop the leak or pull into port or get bigger pumps to pump it out. But the fact is we're leaking more than and education in Manchester is in that place. So back to the first issue is I don't like the tax cap because of the fact that it holds us in a place and time. If a more sophisticated society, you think about people's personal budgets. When anybody watching this program over the age of 50 was growing up, there were no iPhones. You didn't need to pay T-Mobile or AT&T $200 or $300 a month for mobile phones. You didn't need it. We don't need a smartphone. Why do you need it? You don't need to text. There was no place in the budget, and if you had a tax cap in your budget 15 years ago, you would have no place for your smartphone. And everybody watching this show who's got a son or daughter at home or who are sitting there themselves with their smartphone, they should take it and dunk it in a bucket of water or lock it in a drawer and stop paying for it and say, "There's our tax cap in this family. We're not." And when you decided, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, to allow yourself the luxury of having a smartphone, did you decide not to eat chicken anymore? That from now on you're only going to have hamburger, and that you'll only eat 6 dinners a week and not 7 because you're going to use that 7th meal money. You found the savings there. Or do you turn off your heating in your house in February and live in the cold-ish weather of March and April by reducing? That's where you got the money. No, you didn't. You expanded your budget. You expanded your income in order to be able to afford your mobile phone. And you're very happy to have the luxury of it. And those of you who grew up without an air conditioner and, mom opened the windows and let the air blow through, or you sat out on the stoop on a Friday night and fanned yourself, I think you were delighted when you went over to Walmart or to Home Depot and you bought your first air conditioner and you stuck it in the window. Did you, when you did that and you decided not only are you going to buy the air conditioner, put it in the window because you like to have a cooler room to sleep in, did you also say, well, okay, we're not going to buy crabgrass killer for the grass and let the weeds grow in the grass because we can't do both, we can only do one? That's the ridiculousness of those who hold the line on the tax cap for no reason other than based on this sort of, the tax cap is sacrosanct. It doesn't matter if we have kids without services. It doesn't matter if we've got the least well-funded school system in the state. It doesn't matter that we've got huge numbers of kids in front of teachers. It doesn't matter that we're an embarrassment to ourselves in the state as having an education system that's as weakly funded as it is. We don't care any of that. We're going to hold the line on this tax cap. It doesn't bear scrutiny. Going back to the idea of using the different number, so the idea of consumer price index would be that if you wanted to compare, that's sort of the shopping basket of the cost of food items, the cost of gasoline. There's a definitive group of whatever it is, 200 products or something that make up the so-called basket of goods that describes the consumer price index. It's the consumer price index, and by that it implies sort of the household weekly or monthly or eventually annual cost. That's what it is. It's not, for instance, the cost of let's say heating oil. Because in any given year, heating oil might go up by 20% because of something that's happening in the Middle East, or because of problems with refining capacity in the Gulf Coast, or whatever else it might be, or because it's a particularly cold winter. So it is not the heating oil index. It's not the transportation index. It's not the labor cost index. It is this basket of mostly sort of domestic products and household goods. Now, if we go and we look at Nashua, for instance, Nashua uses a different index. And the argument has been made, and I think rightfully, that the index should be different. The index, given that if you support the tax cap and you're saying what we really want to do is we're not trying to smother government and actually kill it off and close our schools, because we have some people out there who would be very happy to see public schools gone, because they tell us that they are ungodly and that they are government schools, and that they're places of indoctrination of our children. So there's some of your neighbours who smile at you as they drive by in the morning and leave the driveway who actually believe that, and while they may say whatever they may say, in their hearts they believe that the public schools are evil, and they some of them have been elected to office right here in the city of Manchester, and they work every day, and it's evidenced by their votes to do what they can to ensure that the public schools don't have the funds they need. So leaving those people to a side, we're not going to refer. We're not going to. I'm just talking about the people who actually are just well-intentioned, good public representatives who understand that people have fixed budgets, that there are elderly people who are relying on social welfare. There are people who, so there are people who don't have the capacity to just sort of, let's spend some more money over here. And so being a good fiscal conservative, sitting on a school board, a board of mayor and alderman, you're looking at it that way. And when I'm talking to them, as I'm doing now, I'm saying that with those people who are not in the business of trying to ruin our city or shut down our schools in particular or damage them, which is most people. Where I think we have it wrong is we're using the wrong index. So if the Nashua index uses, and I'm sorry I don't have the letters. It's like CPI, but it's a different set of letters. But what it basically does is it measures the costs of sort of running a school district or running a municipality in this case. So in its bucket of things, instead of the cost of a pound of butter, the cost of carrots, the cost of milk, the cost of vegetable oil, the cost of eggs, in the cost of clothes and the cost of shoes, instead of the basket being made up of those things like CPI is, the basket is made up of the stuff that actually public authorities and cities and school districts have in their basket. The question would be, what was the cost increase? Because by definition, it's almost always an increase. What's the difference in costs in the things that actually cities buy? And that may be everything from road salt to salaries and pay for employees, wages, healthcare and benefits, the cost of services. The cost of debt, if there's the bonding costs, etc. All the pieces that would make up, and in the school district, what's the cost of heating oil for heat? If it's oil, it's used to heat schools. What is the cost of what's the average increase in the cost of books for math and English and other languages? What is the increase in costs in technology? And you measure that bucket of things. and you say and that bucket of things, then there is a set that's agreed, and when you look at that, it often is a different number than the number from CPI, because while butter and eggs and milk and vegetable oil might have only gone up by 1.6% last year, actually, books and healthcare for employees and other things have gone up by 2.3%. And so, if you let's double it to make it easy. Let's say the CPI has gone up by 1.5%, and this bucket of things that every municipal, we'd all agree that the cost of replacing traffic lights, the cost of police cars, the cost of fire trucks, the cost of water pipes for the waterworks, whatever it is that makes up the basket of things, the shovels for the people at the Parks and Rec, whatever it is, we should be able to agree that obviously that's the bucket of stuff that we should be compared. This is every other municipality in the state, in the country. This is the set of things they use. How much has that gone up? And then I think rightfully, if you want, and I don't believe in a tax cap, but if you wanted a tax cap, then you'd say, let's measure it against that. And what's happening in Manchester, as opposed to Nashua, for instance, is Nashua is using a bucket of stuff that looks like that, the cost of municipal expenditures, and we're using household CPI. So we're using the wrong index. And we should have a discussion, but there really isn't a venue in the city of Manchester to have discussions like this, because what happens in discussions like this is we very quickly deteriorate into arguments around which are basically ideology and politics, and people get all, then they attribute motives to people that may or may not be there and all that stuff. But the tax cap has had the effect in Manchester, ladies and gentlemen, of causing us to move from close to the bottom to the bottom. And what our public representatives ought to be doing is explaining that to the people. So our Mayor Joyce Craig, should take whatever opportunities she has to put that out there. Our board of school members should take that opportunity to put that out there. As a subset of this, we're heading into a period where we're going to be looking at contracts for teachers and fire officers and other people. We know, for instance, that in the United States, sadly, over time, the cost of health care is rising at a rate greater than inflation. CPI, perhaps 5 times the height of CPI. Now, this is a problem for us as a society, and it's a problem for us as a city. To pretend that the rising costs of healthcare, which we have made some changes to the formula around teachers sharing more of healthcare and public employees sharing more of healthcare. In the end, whether it's the city or the rising health costs are rising health costs, and so. If the public employees, let's say in this case the teachers, were to accept all the increasing costs, then somebody has to accept them. And what we're doing as a public authority is pretending that we can live within this 1.6%, while the healthcare for our 1,000 employees went up by 15%. And so in order to cover the 15%, we have to get our public employees to contribute more. And we have to eliminate some employees so that we have enough money to pay the benefits that are needed. Over time, if you continue to insist on your CPI portion, and if healthcare were to continue to increase at just, let's say, 10%, and now just like a moment ago we talked about going back to 1900 for the tax cap right there, let's go forward to the year 2100. And you'll be at a point where the salary and the salary package for teachers will be less than the cost of their health care, and so so it simply doesn't work, right? To simply insist that this King Canute, and that King Canute's the guy who tried to hold back the tide, right? And stood, or he ordered the tide not to come in, and found out that in the end he wasn't king of everything. we this CPI thing, it just simply doesn't. It's a blunt instrument, and I understand it. I understand the idea behind it, and I understand there are those who believe genuinely that there is significant waste in the system, and I'm all for finding waste, right? If we can find waste in the system, then let's have it, And let's do something about it. And there are places where new technology, technology does displace employees in many industries. It's a little harder to do it in education, because in the end it's about teachers in front of students. But there are places where technology should be able to deliver some benefits, and we should be looking at that all the time. It's just that I've been looking at the Manchester School District for a long time, and generally speaking, I haven't been able to find these buckets of savings that people can find. And I would draw your attention to the fact that there's been a long history of, let's leave them nameless, but there's been a long history of so-called fiscal conservative white knights who ride in to the battle, saying that they're here to fix everything, and they know that there's waste there, and they're going to come in and fix it. And they come in and they don't find it, and they spend the year or two going through the Excel spreadsheets, can't find anything of what they have believed for their whole lives, that this is a wasteful system, and then leave with their tail between their legs. They never get to the point of turning to the camera, so to speak, and saying, you know what, everything I told you before I became a public representative and the 4 years I was here, I actually didn't find. I didn't find any place where there was a bunch of savings to be made. And actually, I looked at the surrounding towns and all the other districts, and I looked nationally, and I found out that, we're running a pretty lean, mean, effective machine here in Manchester. They don't get to there. They just decide not. They pull Paul Ryan. They decide to, or Speaker Ryan. They decide to leave the fray. I don't usually deal with national politics, but I have to tell you, Speaker Ryan departing at the moment he's departing, I find amazing. The idea that what he is, of putting this millstone around the neck of the American people, of this so-called tax program, which is now going to, by 2020, which is a year and a half away, we're now told that the effect of this budget, and this is the Office of Management budget, this is not Jim O'Connell's numbers, these are the official government numbers, that the results of the Trump tax program, that besides giving most of the money to the wealthiest 1%, that it's going to contribute to a current budget deficit of $1 trillion a year. Just let that sink in for a minute. What that means, right? So we have the national debt of now 20 trillion, or approaching it. We have decided through this tax cut to add. We will now spend $1 trillion more every year than we take in. We'll borrow $1 trillion, mostly from the Chinese, every year more than we take in. The last time, when Bill Clinton left office, he came in and there was a current budget deficit, so we were spending more than we took in every year as a country. And when he left office, he handed the American people a country that had a positive current budget surplus of $500 million a year the day he left. And he worked on that for 8 years and got it there. When President Obama came in, of course, it was 2008, and we were losing millions of jobs a month, and the economy was in total free fall, and the stock market had dropped precipitously. So, what we've been given by Speaker Ryan and his friends is this amazing $1 trillion a year. This is before you have any unpaid for wars or any stuff bought on credit cards or any more chicanery going on in Washington, D.C. You're openly, with a bold face. Republicans are going to go out into the masses this summer, and congressional people are going to, congressmen and women are going to go around the country and ask to be re-elected, and they're going to look people in the face and say, for the 8 years after 2008, when American working families and poor people were losing their houses left, right, and centre, when millions of jobs were being lost every month, when our car industry almost did get to its knees, and they wanted it killed off, so there would be no GM and no Ford if they had had their way. They couldn't do anything because they had to hold the line on the deficit was so bad we couldn't afford to borrow another penny. That's what we listened to for 8 years. When Hurricane Sandy hit New Jersey, they couldn't pay the money to rebuild the Jersey Shore or to contribute money to FEMA for rebuilding efforts in New Jersey and New York because we couldn't afford to add a penny to the national debt. But these are the same, because I put this in the same thing as the tax cap people. We'll have 30 kids in a class because we can't afford, because of the tax cap. We can't afford it. That's been their answer. It's an easy answer because, sadly, and I hate to go here, but it has the effect of being able to go to bed and go to sleep at night time while you have the poorest, the least well off, and the least empowered suffering the consequences. Because, if you have the money, you can send your kid to Derryfield for $30,000 a year, or you can send him over to Trinity for $12,000, or you can, or whatever it may be. And let me just say for a second, I like Derryfield. I think it's a great school, and I have friends whose kids go there, and God bless them. And Trinity, I have a long history with Trinity and family members going there, etc. And so I've nothing against either of those two institutions. I am saying, though, that the effect of holding the line and making sure that kids in public school don't have enough teachers, don't have enough space, don't have enough books, don't have enough computers, don't have enough of anything, if you're able to say to yourself, well, I'm not a bad person, I'm not a mean person, I'm not a non-Christian person, I'm simply trying to do the right thing for my country as a loyal citizen, and I'm trying to do what's right for my community by holding the line. And it's tough, but I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and it's actually going to benefit all these people by me being by me holding the line on this place. When you tear that edifice down, you find that what you've done in your time in office is you've held the line to ensure these things don't happen, and in the end, you have no problem with giving with borrowing the trillions of dollars from these very same people and their grandchildren to give it to the richest people in the country. And oh, by the way, when you have it done, Speaker Ryan says, well, thank you very much. I've accomplished what I came to Washington to do. I have stripped the federal government. I have borrowed the future for generations to come. I'm handing you the largest current budget deficit ever to be seen, with no plan in place to fix it. And there's only one place we're going to go to down over time, which is a continued deterioration of our infrastructure and government. And eventually, of course, we're going to have to do something, and that means we're going to have to attack Social Security and Medicare, because they're going to be unsustainable because we've given all the money away. The 14 members of Congress, ladies and gentlemen, who sat and behind closed doors and came up with the Trump tax plan. Those 14 members of Congress, amazingly, you know what their tax cut on average per person, each of those 14, what the tax cut was worth to them? And they're not the biggest beneficiaries of these tax cuts. It's the Kushners and the robber barons of the 2018s who are the real beneficiaries. But these 14 people, their average tax savings per year was $310,000. per year. Those are the 14 people who decided this is where the tax cuts should be. No increase to, let's say, minimum wage. The tax cuts for the middle class are going to fade out in by 2028. So in 10 years they'll be gone, and you'll be back to where you were. The tax cuts for the wealthy don't ever fade away. They're baked in forever. So it's amazing to me that people support this nonsense and somehow I had a guy talk to me the other day, and he's a nice guy, and we're talking about schools and this poor guy, he's I don't know, maybe he has a lot of money hidden under a mattress somewhere, but as far as I know, he is he's somebody who is disabled, a young man who's not whatever the word is, but lives off of social welfare, and so doesn't have a lot of money, and yet he's arguing loudly that we can't afford to spend another dime in our schools, and that our kids, that we have, that just simply the money isn't there, and our kids are just going to have to suck it up, and it doesn't matter that our kids get less than every other kid in the rest of the state, but that's just the way things are today. And I'm sitting looking at him, and I'm thinking to myself, like, how do you, like you're voting, talk about voting against your own interest. If you have children tomorrow, your children will rely upon the fact that there is a great public school system there that's able to lift them out of poverty, lift them into being successful citizens. That's the thing that you would want there. So if a guy who lives in one of the largest houses in Manchester, and I know people in Manchester who pay $25,000 a year in taxes, in property taxes, that's a lot of money. A 10% increase to them is $2,500. Which is real money in anybody's terms. It's $50 a week. But that's at the very top of the tax bracket in Manchester. But there are people in Manchester who aren't paying direct taxes themselves. They may live in an apartment, and therefore pricing may go up as a result. But who will be some of the loudest voices for, when I was a kid we had 50 in the class, or and we've got to stop mollycoddling these kids. And I'm like, what is the like instead of arguing for privatization and taking money out of public schools to give to, religious schools and private schools and homeschoolers, and giving it to a private company to come in and manage it and take their 5% cut out of your taxpayer money and mine. What about the answer being, why don't we invest in our public schools? Why don't we actually spend some money and see if we can make them better than they are already? Why don't we invest in modernity? Why don't we invest in new programs, in new buildings? Why don't we invest in teachers so that we have more teachers in front of students? Why not do what's the problem with that? My problem isn't with the haves who are happy to see public schools, not all of them, but I mean sometimes, who will argue that sort of let them eat cake sort of stuff. I am just blown away by people at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder who look at this and somehow are fine with public schools being underfunded. And all you have to do, ladies and gentlemen, is put up your periscope and have a look around. And Google some stuff and have a look at what's going on in public education across the United States, where we have a very small group of people who are committed to the destruction of public schools, and we're seeing it happen. We've seen it happen in Wisconsin, in West Virginia, in Kentucky, in Kansas, in Oklahoma, in Texas. Go look up Texas and what Texas has done to kids, special needs children, over the last 10 years. Just see, they lost a court case 3 or 4 months ago, where they have saved bazillions of dollars on the backs of kids with autism and Down syndrome and other, and not just those, but all kinds of kids in need. and so this attack goes on, and we see it here, even here in the state of New Hampshire, where we have got a continuous effort at attacking the edifice that is public education to bring it down, mostly because these people don't like the fact that these are not theocratic schools. I listen to people all the time, and they're the code words for. I listened to one. I read a piece by somebody the other day who used the example of the kids who walked out for the 17 minutes in recognition of the massacre in Parkland in Florida, and these people were so incensed that students went out and marched and said that school violence has to stop. And they said that this was an example of left-wing ideology in our schools, and our kids were brainwashed, and that this shouldn't be allowed. And I'm like, what are you? So it's a very strange, and odd worldview to have, that you think that when at the end are public schools built for everybody, and are without, they don't promote one religion over another. They do promote not just civility, but civics. They teach our kids about that which our country is, that which made it great, that which will continue to keep it great in the future. These are the things, not just the math and the science and the English, but the job of educators is to turn these young people into stalwart, reliable, clean living, good thinking, strong citizens, so that we can have the great future that this country deserves. And the fact that we have a bunch of reactionary, small-minded people attacking these institutions is deplorable. So I'm sorry about the long editorial tonight, but people need to be aware of what's going on. It's not about the particular, shiny object that's dancing around in front of you at any one time. The picture writ large is that our public institutions, and in particular our public schools, are under attack by people who have lost the battle otherwise, the battle of ideas, and now would prefer to attack the institutions that implement those ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of another evening. I thank you for your time tonight, and for paying attention. I look forward to seeing you next week. Is school vacation week. Everybody, please be safe, and I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. Good night, and good luck from Jim O'Connell. Good night.